So, welcome everyone to another video byte from Cyber Protection Magazine. And I have with me today Richard Orange, Vice President from Exabeam, Vice President EMEA. And we're going to talk about how companies can modernize their outsourced security. Why outsource security? Well, I think we have an almost perfect storm, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, because cybersecurity skills are in high demand, but there's also a shortage of those. In addition, the complexity of cybersecurity solutions is rising, and also the market, the attack rate, the attacks are themselves are becoming more complex. So there's a need for a security operations center, outsourced security operations center, but they need to be up to date and up to speed with the latest development. So Richard, what would you advise businesses in terms of modernizing their SOC?
Hey Patrick, hey listen, first thing, thanks for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. I think the market is really changing here. If you take a look at what's been happening in the security event management space over the last 15 years, what we have here is an industry that has been carrying out its duties, carrying out its actions in a very consistent way for a number of years now. And what I mean by that is a lot of the technology, a lot of the tooling in the market, it's been designed in a way that allows people to go and look for things. And that's a good thing. There's a lot of security tools out there in general. If you look right across an organization, the average organization has at least more than 30 or 40 security tools. So trying to make sense of what those security tools are telling you, trying to stitch all of that information into something that actually makes it useful so you can go and hunt for threats in your organization, that's a pretty hard thing to do. And so the first and second generation tools in this market that were made available were okay at allowing you to pull together some of those pieces of information. I think what's hard now is the volumes of data that we're dealing with, relative to 10 or 15 years ago is night and day different. It's something that, if you just look at, even at a basic tooling level, it's not possible to build platforms to try and monitor and correlate these tools, in your own environment on premise. For big scale projects like this, you need cloud scale tooling, and you need the ability to be able to monitor and manage those tools in a way that is going to allow you to find the threats that are happening in your environment quickly. And that's not easy. We see organizations trying to take different directions in how they do that. Some try and build their own SOC environments. Some look to the managed service and partner community, and both are really valid approaches. The hard thing is, finding the right tools that are a good fit for you, and then making them fit for the type of threats that you are trying to address in your own environment. And every environment is different. And the maturity of every environment is different. Skills in the market is hard. We're living in a time where the cybersecurity skills deficit, which is talked about a lot, is a real challenge. So if you look at all the job adverts, everybody's asking for the same skill set. Part of the problem here is that the tools don't make it any easier. The tools themselves are demanding quite a high skill set. So I think that there are a few dynamics that if I were a CISO, and thankfully I am not, because that is a very, very difficult job, then that is a hard balance to strike at the minute, and the market is definitely changing.
Yeah, about the market change, we see that there's a lot of cloud adoption actually, and not only in cybersecurity, but also, of course, in the application space. So, I think if you look at small and medium-sized businesses, they would probably go to the cloud for their applications more often. Would you advise them to go to the cloud for their cybersecurity needs then as well? And how could they, because they would probably still have some parts of their IT on premise, how can they include those in their cybersecurity management?
So we've seen a really big shift in organizations that are trying to consume cybersecurity services as cloud services. If we went back even 5 years ago and I walked into some very large, companies as I was, they would tell me there is no way that we can take cloud in our environment, regulatory reasons, trust reasons. There were a lot of barriers. I don't see that now. I see increasingly less regulatory reason why you might be able to, consume a cloud service. And, that applies at the very top end of the market, at the very large enterprise, in highly regulated, and even in some government organizations. But I also see it at the smaller end of the market as well. And if you think about the evolution of cybersecurity tooling, if you take a look at something like the endpoint market, where if you went back maybe 16 or 17 years, you had, people like McAfee and Symantec that were very dominant in that space. That whole area has been transformed now by, companies like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, who have made their products easy to consume out of cloud-based services. And, one of the reasons they've been so successful is they've been able to make their product easy to consume, but they've also been able to, commoditize it in a way that where the organization was in need of change, in need of rapid change, or where threats and the threat landscape changes, they can adapt their services in the cloud to it much faster than the on-premise type solutions. In 17 years ago, we were still, even 10 years ago, we were still operating in the world where an antivirus signature would be updated via a DAT file that may be downloaded once a week. And then Microsoft would have, Patch Tuesday, and then all of a sudden there was, Hack Wednesday, right? And so what we now see is an environment where you have to be able to adapt to the threats quickly. And I think, practically speaking, the only way that we can do that is through cloud services. That's absolutely something that we see in the SOC space. So being able to consume tooling and services as a service, as a cloud service, is something that the market is absolutely demanding. And it's the right thing to do as well. Think about it, if you're at the smaller end of the market and you don't have the skills and the bodies and the people that a very large financial services, customer would like to have, what you want to know is you've got the backing of a dedicated cybersecurity organization that is there to help you, that can help you if a new threat comes into the wild, or if there is a new ransomware threat that you need to worry about. And those updates are, delivered centrally from the cloud. So we definitely are seeing this shift, and that is, almost irrespective of segment or size, verticalization or compliance requirement.
I absolutely agree. But on the other hand, what I've seen, and I've seen a survey which sort of did not really surprise me, but it confirms my perspective, is that on the one hand, you have these large organizations. They have manpower. They have they have the money. They have the resources to pay for their own SOC maybe. And then on the lower end, you have the small and medium or small sized business, and they have to be in the cloud anyway, because they're not gonna operate their own Exchange server. They're not gonna operate their own ERP system. They do everything in the cloud anyway. So it's logical that they will go to the cloud. But then you have the medium sized businesses, and that's what the survey showed, that cloud adoption in the medium sized market is not that big. I think one of the reasons is, at least over here in Germany, I can say that that medium market is relatively conservative in their thinking. So probably they haven't made that mental transition to the cloud. But I think also they used to invest a lot of money in their on-premise IT, comparably, of course. So they are reluctant to give that up for the cloud. Would maybe cybersecurity management and SOC, would that be a first step for them to go to the cloud?
So look, I think there are some regional variations here as well to consider. And if we look to the German market, the regulations are wonderfully positive around the way that the German authorities demand the protection of the workers in and around the German market. I think that's a very, very positive thing. My experience of operating with Workers' Council, for example, have always been very good experiences because they've got the best intentions of the users at heart. I think what I'm seeing, and again, using the example of the German market, is that Workers' Councils they want comfort and confidence that because you're taking a cybersecurity tool, whether that is a cloud delivered service or an on-premise service, is that there is no unnecessary invasion of a user's privacy. And I think that there is a fine balance here between protecting the organization and the company, as you should do against cybersecurity attacks out there, and protecting the privacy of the individual. And I think if you think about the SOC is potentially an area that, if I were someone that were considering the privacy of an individual, I would consider the SOC a reasonable risk to the privacy of the individual, because I would be worrying, well, are you monitoring my individual a little bit too closely? What are you really looking at? And so I think you've got to try and strike a balance with, look, we're only and some of the things that we see is we will work with SOCs, and there are similar things up in Finland and Sweden, and we're seeing an increasing amount of regulation in the UK market where we have to say we are not taking an over invasive approach on users' privacy individually. What we are trying to do is to protect the organization, and here's what we can do to work with the SOC to make sure that they are not looking too much at the specifics of a worker's environment, and actually they are just taking the necessary protections of the individual. For me, I think if you are not consuming security as a cloud-based service today, there is a very definite risk, because of the way that the threat landscape is so dynamic. You are at risk of getting left behind a little bit, and that is the balance that you have to take. And I think if I look at the majority of the interactions that we have with our customers, I think there are very, very few exceptions where we cannot work as a cloud delivered cybersecurity service. It is about trying to partner up as a cybersecurity specialist and the consumer of a cybersecurity service to figure out what is the appropriate boundary and how can we do that. Do I think that cloud delivered services are the right thing to do? Yeah, I think we've got to get to that point now, because it's the only way that we can effectively try and implement detections and protections in a very real-time way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I must admit, like a couple of years back, I was a little bit doubtful about whether cloud actually makes sense in the long run. But by now, I see, it's just the better, more secure way of doing things. And as you said, it's irrespective of size of the company, segment of the company. I think it's just the better thing to do. Now, I have one last question, which might be a little philosophical, but you mentioned the dynamics in the cybersecurity market and the first and second generation tooling and everything. So where do you see the cybersecurity market in 5 years from now?
Yeah, great question. So I think that if you look at what is happening in the market in general, if you look at the way that attacks are developing, there is a little bit of commonality around the way that the threat landscape is developing, and that is that attacks and breaches are intentional. Okay, there's always been the nation state threat, and there has been, you know, the kind of more junior member that might be just doing it as a little bit of a hobby on the side. But the attacks that are happening are very intentional. I think it's very hard if you are consuming cybersecurity tools to effectively deploy controls that are either pattern-based or reactionary only. I think what we're going to see is more tools that are effectively using machine learning techniques to accelerate your ability to respond. And I'll give you an example. We believe, you know, something that we talk to our customers about a lot is that if you look at any of the major breaches of the past 5 or 6 years, credential theft has been at the heart of pretty much everything out there. I mean, that is the reality of what we're dealing with. It's all about the credentials. It starts with the credentials, whether or not the credentials are stolen, or whether or not they are deceived, or whether or not, in fact, sometimes they are manipulated out of users. If you look at the recent attacks via Lapsus, which were pretty well publicized, in that example, and we have had customers that have, you know, experienced this, they have had their end users offered an awful lot of money for their credentials. Why? Because once you have the credentials to get into the environment, all of the attack techniques that we see, either around ransomware or lateral movement or insider threat, they are enabled through having credentials. So, you know, one example, we know of a user, an end user that was offered $20,000 for their credentials. It's a lot of money, right? Depending on what you're earning in a year, that's a very material amount of cash out there. Your ability to be able to protect yourself is determined by your ability to understand when credential misuse has happened and how that is happening. And I think that being able to use machine learning to spot things like normal versus abnormal behavior is very hard. The difference is I can go and look for things in my network by writing queries that allow me to look for things. And that's how traditionally SOCs have operated. They have gone and put a policy together that allows them to look for a threat in their environment. Well, if you're looking for it, you're probably too late. Okay. If you have the ability to spot abnormal behavior in your environment, and a lot of that abnormal behavior, especially when you think about lateral movement, happens from credential misuse. If you can spot abnormal behavior, if you can spot the user that normally only logs in 12 times a day, but they're actually trying to log in 355 times a day, and they're trying to log in 12 different locations at the same time, if you can spot that, then you're in a better place. There are entire segments of cybersecurity that are spinning up off the back of these attack types. Zero trust. Okay, never trust, always verify. Why? Because we don't trust the individuals. Why? Because strong authentication is not rolled out everywhere. Why? Because people haven't gotten around to it, so they use basic authentication techniques. It's an expensive journey for organizations to go on. So for me, you've got to have effective cybersecurity tooling and controls that give you the ability to proactively spot when a breach is happening in the environment, stitch together how that attack type is happening, and then work out the most effective way of containing it. So in terms of market evolution, I think that's one of the biggest changes that we're going to see over the next 5 years.
Just because you mentioned credentials essentially, and there is this new, I think it's based on FIDO, the standard, but Apple is rolling it out already. So basically a passwordless future. Finally, we can get rid of passwords. Do you see that as a sort of thing which will happen in the next couple of years? Also, in light of that, a little bit further into the future, but in light of quantum computing.
It's a long journey for the evolution of the authentication market. There has obviously been an awful lot of private equity money that has gone into the evolution of authentication, of passwordless environments. We've seen a very, very big investment of that space. How will that play out? Hard to say. Who would have thought that Okta would be as big as they are now 10 years ago? I mean, they're such an influential player. So I think that there is definitely movement in that market that will happen. Again, if I just pull it back to security fundamentals, I think that it's never enough to have a single control out there that you can trust on. So, an alert from a next generation antivirus tool that tells you that something bad has happened on an individual machine is good. What you really need is to understand the blast radius of what is happening on that device itself. And you can only effectively put that together through real correlation between different security tools. And putting that correlation together is very hard because the tools out there that do the correlations are difficult. And as we talked about earlier in the conversation, the people and the skills needed in order to put those investigations together are pretty highly skilled. And we have something that we see quite a lot where if you have two analysts that work in a SOC and you put them side by side and you give them the same breach and you ask them to perform an investigation, how many times would you expect that those analysts to come up with the same results as each other? And it's very rare because it's such a manual process at the minute. And what we see is analysts are trying to follow the breadcrumbs on an attack type to try and see how things have happened. One of the things that I think needs to change here is I don't know that we'll ever get to a position of fully autonomous investigations. I'm not sure that happens, but I think that we can get repeatability into the investigation process. I think if there are 20 steps in an investigation, I think the first 10 steps of that investigation can be automated. I do believe that we can get to that point. So considering SOC transformation, whether or not that's an in-house SOC performing that investigation or whether that's a managed service provider, I don't think it matters. I think as a consumer of a security service, what you want is confidence that the investigation that's happening is a quality investigation. So I think that, again, going back to it, your ability to respond to a breach is limited by your ability to be able to detect it. So whether it's, passwordless, that's the direction that you're taking, or next generation AV, or next generation, whatever it is, I think effective machine learning based controls are something that are going to be absolutely needed in order for us to scale our cybersecurity responsibility.
Yeah, I think that was a very good closing statement because I absolutely agree. Yeah, thank you, Richard. That was really helpful. It turned out a little bit longer than we usually do that, but I really liked your insights, and yeah, hope to do that again maybe one day.
Patrick, it was a pleasure. Thank you.